My name is Nora Callahan, and I am 34 years old. 6 months ago, I stood at my father's graveside in the rain and watched my older brother Daniel reach into the casket during the viewing, unclasp the vintage watch from my father's wrist, and slide it onto his own without asking a single person in that room for permission. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at our mother. He didn't pause to consider whether anyone else had feelings about what he was doing. He just took it, straightened his jacket, and turned around to greet the funeral guests like nothing unusual had happened at all. That watch was a 1967 Omega Seamaster that my grandfather had given my father on his wedding day. My father wore it every single day for 41 years without exception. He wore it to my college graduation, to Daniel's wedding, to every Sunday dinner, to every first day, to every single moment in our family's life that mattered enough to remember. He never took it off for anything. I can still see his wrist without it when they dressed him for the casket, and the pale band of skin where the watch had lived for 4 decades looked like an absence so specific it hurt to look at. That watch was the most personal thing my father owned in this world, and my brother took it without a word. What Daniel didn't know, what none of us knew, until the estate reading 3 weeks later, was that my father had taken that watch to a jeweler 8 months before he died. He'd had something engraved on the inside of the case in small, precise letters, something private and deliberate and carefully chosen, something he never mentioned to a single person in our family. When the estate lawyer asked if anyone had examined the inside of the watch before distributing it, my brother unclipped it from his wrist with slightly shaking hands and pressed the small release on the case. The room went completely silent as he read what was engraved there. Then he looked up at me. And for the first time in my entire life, my older brother Daniel Callahan had absolutely nothing to say. Before I tell you what was written inside that watch, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely means something to you. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're watching from, and I read every single comment. I really do. Now let me take you back to where this all began, to the family that shaped me, to the brother who thought he was born to lead it, and to the father who spent his whole life saying the true thing in the quietest possible voice, right up until the very end. Growing up in the Callahan household meant growing up in 2 very different worlds that happened to share the same address. My brother Daniel was 5 years older than me, the firstborn son of an Irish Catholic family from a small city in Ohio where the Callahan name had meant something for 3 generations. My grandparents talked about Daniel's birth like an answered prayer, like the thing the family had been waiting for before it could finally begin. He was sharp and confident and loud in the particular way of boys who are told from the cradle that the world is waiting to hear what they have to say. By the time he was 12, he spoke at the dinner table like a man who already knew how most conversations were going to end. Then there was me, the second child, the girl who arrived 4 years later and completed the family photograph without really being the point of it. I don't say that with bitterness, because I've spent a long time making peace with the truth of my childhood, and bitterness doesn't serve that process. I say it because it's accurate and because the story I'm about to tell you only makes sense if you understand the foundation it was built on. My father, Thomas Callahan, was a genuinely good man. I need you to understand that before anything else. He was honest and hardworking and loyal. A high school history teacher who stayed late to help students understand things they thought were beyond them, who coached the debate team for 22 years without extra pay because he believed in the importance of young people learning to argue well. He came to my school plays. He learned to French braid my hair after my mother went back to work full-time when I was 9, standing behind me in the bathroom every morning with his big hands fumbling patiently through the sections until he got it right. But he was also a man of his generation, raised in a particular tradition that had very clear ideas about what sons were for and what daughters were for. Sons carried things forward. Daughters were loved, of course, deeply, genuinely loved, but the carrying forward was understood to belong to the men. Daniel absorbed this understanding the way children absorb the unspoken grammar of their homes, effortlessly and completely. He made announcements at the dinner table while I asked questions. He declared decisions while I requested permissions. He moved through our family with the easy authority of someone who had never once doubted that his voice was the one everyone was waiting to hear. The watch lived inside this mythology from the very beginning. I was 7 years old when I first asked if I could hold it. We were at Easter dinner at my grandparents' house, and I watched my grandfather lean over and fasten it carefully onto my father's wrist. The same ritual I'd seen every time they were together. I was fascinated by it, the weight of it, the way the second hand swept in one continuous motion instead of ticking. The gold case worn smooth in the places my grandfather's fingers had touched it most. When I asked if I could hold it, my grandfather smiled at me with real warmth and said it was something that would pass through the men in the family, not unkindly, just stating a fact that was as natural to him as weather. I nodded and didn't ask again. I understood even at 7 when a door had been gently but firmly closed. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out for 27 years, was that my father had heard that exchange across the table, and that it had stayed with him every single day since. I want to be honest with you about Daniel, because this is not a story about a villain. My brother is not a bad person. He is a complicated person who is shaped by the same family I was shaped by, just in the opposite direction. Where I was made smaller, he was made larger, and neither of us chose that. We loved each other in the imperfect, deeply rooted way of people who share a childhood, with all the invisible damage that common history leaves behind. But Daniel had a pattern that had hardened over the decades into something he no longer even noticed in himself. He spoke for the family. He made decisions alone and then informed the rest of us about what had been decided. He positioned himself as the natural authority in every family situation, and our parents, especially our mother, allowed it because it had always been easier to let the current run in the direction it wanted to run. When our mother needed a new car, Daniel researched the options and told her which one she would be buying. When our father's health started declining 3 years ago, Daniel called a family meeting and presented the care plan he'd designed, which doctors we'd see, which specialists we'd consult, how the finances would be managed, what the daily schedule would look like. He laid it out with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to being the one at the front of the room. I was in that meeting. I had been the one actually accompanying my father to his medical appointments for months by that point. I was the one sitting in examination rooms listening to the doctors, asking follow-up questions, understanding what was being said between the lines of the official prognosis. I had real information, real knowledge of what was actually happening. But every time I tried to contribute, Daniel would nod along and then continue with his own version of the plan, absorbing my words into his framework in a way that made it impossible to tell where his thinking ended and mine began. My input didn't disappear exactly, it just lost its edges, became indistinguishable from his decisions, stopped being something I could point to and say, that came from me. My father noticed this. I know that now, though I wouldn't know it for certain until after he was gone. About 2 years before he died, my father called me on a Tuesday afternoon. This was unusual. We had a Sunday call tradition that had held for years, and midweek calls from him almost never happened. I was driving home from work when my phone rang, and something in the way his name appeared on my screen made me pull over before I answered. Some instinct told me this wasn't a quick check-in. He was quiet for a moment after I picked up, the way he got quiet when he was choosing his words with care. I waited, listening to the familiar sound of his breathing, the slight creak of his chair in the background.
Nora, I've been thinking about some things lately, and I wanted to call and tell you something I should have said a long time ago. I see how hard you work. Not just at your job, but at this family, at everything you do quietly that nobody announces. I see you, sweetheart, even when I haven't been good at saying so.
The words landed somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. I sat in my parked car with the engine running and felt something shift that I couldn't quite name yet.
Dad, where is this coming from? Are you okay? Is something going on?
He was quiet again for just a moment, and then he let out a small sound that was almost a laugh. The gentle, slightly sad laugh of a man who has been sitting with something for too long.
Everything is fine. I just wanted to say it now, without waiting for the right moment. Because I've been waiting for the right moment my whole life, and I'm starting to understand that it doesn't always come when you expect it.
I didn't know then what, while I still could really, meant. I didn't know he'd already received the first diagnosis, the one he was keeping quiet until he figured out how to tell us. I thought it was just one of those rare conversations that appear sometimes in a long relationship. The moments when someone decides to be more honest than usual for no particular reason. But I've thought about that phone call every day since the funeral, because I know now it was the beginning of something he had decided to do. A series of deliberate choices he would make quietly in his final months to say the things he had been holding in his chest for years. My father's illness moved faster than anyone prepared themselves for. He finally told the family what was happening 6 months after that phone call, and by then things were further along than he'd let us believe. Daniel went immediately into his planning mode, researching treatment options, calling specialists, building spreadsheets of timelines and costs and probabilities. I don't say this critically, it was how Daniel loved, and love expressed through action is still love. I loved differently. I drove 2 hours every Thursday to spend the afternoon with my father, not to organize anything or fix anything, but simply to be there in whatever way he needed. We watched old Western films on the television in his bedroom, or I'd read aloud to him from the history books he'd always intended to get to but never had. Sometimes we sat in companionable silence with the October light coming through the window, and I learned during those hours that there is a kind of closeness between people that requires absolutely no words to exist. It was during one of those Thursday afternoons, about 8 months before he died, that my father mentioned something in passing. He was in a good mood that day, more energy than usual, sitting up in the chair by the window instead of lying down.
I'm going into town with Arthur next week. There's something I want to have done. An errand I've been putting off, and I want to take care of it while I'm feeling well enough to make the trip.
I assumed it was something practical, a prescription to pick up, paperwork to sign, the kind of errand that fills the in-between time of a long illness. He didn't offer more detail, and I didn't ask, because it seemed like something personal he would mention if he wanted to share it. He never brought it up again, and I forgot about it entirely until the afternoon in the lawyer's office, when it suddenly became the most important errand he had ever run. Those Thursday visits became one of the great privileges of my life, though I wouldn't have called them that at the time. At the time, they were just something I did, because I needed to do them, because staying away would have been a kind of abandonment I couldn't live with. But looking back, I understand that my father and I built something real in those quiet hours, something that existed entirely outside the Callahan family machinery, outside Daniel's management and my mother's worry and the medical timeline running in the background of everything. We built a friendship, an honest one, between equals, the kind that I don't think either of us had let ourselves have with the other before. He died on a Wednesday morning in October. Peacefully, thankfully, the kind of death that people mean when they say someone died well. My mother held one hand and I held the other, and Daniel stood at the foot of the bed with his jaw set and his eyes wet, holding the whole room together through sheer will, because falling apart in front of people was not something Daniel had ever learned to do. When it was over, I let go of my father's hand very slowly. I smoothed the blanket over his chest out of some instinct I didn't understand until later, when I realized I was just trying to do one more thing for him before the doing was finished. The funeral home was full the day of the viewing. My father had been a beloved teacher for 30 years, and former students kept appearing through the door all afternoon with red eyes and stories about the ways he had changed the specific direction of their lives. That is a particular kind of legacy, not wealth or property or a name on a building, but the accumulation of small moments in which one person made another person believe in something they were close to giving up on. My father had that kind of legacy, and watching his students grieve him was one of the most painful and beautiful things I have ever witnessed. I stationed myself near the entrance to greet people as they came in, partly because I wanted to see everyone who came, and partly because standing near the casket for too long made the reality of it hit in waves I wasn't prepared to absorb all at once. I was managing myself the way you learn to manage yourself at the events your body attends while your heart is somewhere else entirely. Daniel was at the center of the room, moving through the guests with practiced ease, accepting condolences with the composure of someone who had decided how this day would go, and was executing that plan with precision. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He was warm with people, specific in his memories, present in a way that made everyone who spoke with him feel like they had his full attention. That was always Daniel's gift. The ability to make a room feel organized around him in a way that seemed generous rather than controlling. At some point in the middle of the afternoon, I watched him cross to the casket and stand there for a long moment, looking at our father. His shoulders dropped slightly, which was the most visible grief I would see from him that day. Then, with the quiet efficiency of a man doing something he had already decided, he reached in and unclasped the watch from our father's wrist and put it on his own. No pause, no glance around the room, no consultation, just a hand moving to a wrist and then moving away, and the watch transferring from one Callahan man to the next as though that transfer had been written somewhere long before any of us were born. My mother saw it happen. She was across the room and she met my eyes for just a moment, and her expression was the most complicated thing I had ever seen on her face. Not exactly approval, not exactly protest, just the resignation of a woman who had watched this particular current run for so long that she had stopped, believing it could be redirected. I said nothing. I turned back to the door and greeted the next person who came in and kept the grief in the particular compartment I had built for it that morning. The funeral was not the place. The moment was not the moment. But I carried it with me, and 3 weeks later, in a lawyer's office, it became the moment. My father's estate was not complex by any technical standard. A house, a modest savings account, a life insurance policy, and a collection of personal belongings that carried far more weight in memory than in any appraiser's estimate. His lawyer, Arthur Wells, had handled my grandfather's estate before him and had known my father for 30 years. He was a quiet, careful man in his 60s who ran his office like a library, with an atmosphere of considered silence that I found genuinely comforting that afternoon. We gathered on a Thursday, which felt right to me. My mother sat between me and Daniel. Mr. Wells went through the document in careful sequence, and everything had been arranged with the fairness and specificity that spoke exactly to the kind of man my father had been. The house remained in my mother's name. The savings split evenly 3 ways. Personal items were listed one by one with the names of their intended recipients, down to specific books he wanted specific former students to have. It was toward the very end of the document, when I thought we were nearly through, that Mr. Wells paused and removed his glasses and looked at all 3 of us with an expression I couldn't immediately read.
Your father included a specific instruction in his file, added 8 months ago. He asks that before any personal items leave this office today, the family examine the interior of his Omega watch together, here, during this reading.
The 3 of us went very still at exactly the chesh. Same moment. I felt my mother's arm press slightly against mine. Daniel's hand moved automatically to his wrist, where the watch had been sitting for 3 weeks, claiming its space with the quiet permanence of something that had already been decided. He unclipped it slowly. He held it in his palm for a moment. This thing he had taken without asking, this thing he had been wearing with the certainty of a man who had never imagined the question could be asked differently. Then he pressed the small release on the side of the case and opened it. He read it to himself first. I watched his face from across the table, and what I saw there was something I had genuinely never seen on my brother's face before. Not anger, not defensiveness, not the brisk composure that was his default setting when things didn't go according to plan. Something that looked like the ground dropping away underneath him, a quiet free fall. Then he turned the watch and held it toward me so I could read it too. I leaned forward. The engraving was in small, careful letters, the kind that take a steady hand and a clear intention to produce. It said, "For Nora." She always had time for what mattered most. "Dad!" I read it twice. Then I sat back in my chair and cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry since the morning my father died. Not composed, not managed, not held carefully in a designated compartment, just completely and entirely and without any interest in how it looked. I want to be honest with you about what that moment felt like, because I think you deserve the real version rather than the one that makes narrative sense. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the sharp, clean satisfaction of someone who has been proven right after years of being dismissed. I did not feel anything as simple as vindication. What I felt was grief, a specific, devastating variety of it. The kind that comes when you finally receive something you needed so badly that the receiving of it breaks you open all over again. My father was gone, and the only way he had found to say the thing he had been carrying for 27 years was to engrave it into the inside of a watch case in letters small enough that you had to look closely to find them. He had made it permanent in the only way he could. He had put it somewhere irrefutable, somewhere that could not be absorbed into someone else's framework or redirected by someone louder. He had put it in a place that would require another person to hand it to me with their own hands. My mother held my arm and didn't say anything, which was the right thing. Some moments are not improved by words, and she had known my father long enough to understand that. Daniel set the watch down on the lawyer's table very carefully. He looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something that has just told you something about yourself you weren't ready to know. Then he looked up at me, and his voice when he spoke was quieter than I had ever heard it, stripped of all its usual management, all its practiced authority.
I didn't know he'd done this. I should have asked before I took it. I see that now. And I'm telling you, I'm sorry, Nora. I'm genuinely sorry.
It was the most direct apology my brother had ever offered me in our entire shared lifetime. I looked at him across the table, this man I had grown up beside, this person shaped by the same love that shaped me, just differently, and I felt something complicated and real.
I know you didn't know, Daniel. Neither did I. He kept it from both of us until he was sure no one could argue with it.
The room breathed a little after that. Mr. Wells quietly closed the document folder and gave us a few minutes that nobody asked for, but everyone needed. The drive home from the lawyer's office is one of those journeys I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My mother rode with me because Daniel needed some time alone with whatever was happening inside him, and we drove through streets turning gold and amber in the late October light without speaking much for the first several miles. She was the one who broke the silence. She was looking out the passenger window, and when she spoke, it was in the voice she used when she had decided to be honest rather than careful.
Your father talked about that watch more than you know, Nora. More than I ever told you. He used to say that the wrong person had been told it belonged to the men in this family, and that he intended to correct that before he was done.
The words moved through me slowly, settling into places that had been waiting for them. I kept my eyes on the road and let myself feel the full weight of what she was saying, that my father had been carrying this intention for decades, that it had lived in him quietly alongside everything else, waiting for the moment he was brave enough to act on it.
Then why didn't he just tell me? Why didn't he just say it out loud while he was here and I could hear him say it?
My mother was quiet for a moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice had the texture of someone who has thought about this for a long time and made their peace with a complicated truth.
Because he was afraid of the fight it would cause with Daniel, and because he didn't want you to feel like you were receiving something by default. The engraving was his way of making it a gift instead of a consolation prize. Something chosen, not assigned.
I sat with that for the rest of the drive, about what it means to protect a gift by keeping it secret until it can be given without being challenged. About a man who had been brave in quiet ways his whole life and was trying in his final months to be brave in a way that would last after he was gone. We pulled into my mother's driveway as the sun was going down. We sat in the car for a minute without moving, both of us in no particular hurry to walk back into the house and the ordinary world that had been going on while all of this was happening. Daniel came over that evening. I heard his car in the driveway from the kitchen where I was helping my mother with dinner, and I felt the familiar tension move through my shoulders, the bracing that happens when you've spent a lifetime preparing for a particular kind of conversation. But he didn't come in with a plan. He didn't have his manager face on, that organized calm that signaled a presentation was coming. He came in quietly, set his keys on the counter like he was setting something heavy down, and sat at the kitchen table the way he used to sit there when we were children, without purpose or agenda, just present. My mother put coffee in front of him without asking. We ate dinner together, the three of us, and the conversation moved through small, ordinary things, a movie my mother had seen, the gutters that needed cleaning, a neighbor who had gotten a new dog. Nobody moved the watch from the center of the table where Daniel had placed it when he came in. It just sat there between the salt and the candle holder, present without being discussed. After my mother went to bed, Daniel and I stayed at the table. This was not a thing we did. We were not people who sat in quiet rooms together and said real things to each other. The pattern of our relationship had always been surface and management, and the performance of a sibling relationship rather than the substance of one. He picked up the watch and turned it slowly in his hands. I watched him read the engraving again, and I saw on his face the same unraveling I had seen in the lawyer's office. Quieter now, but still there, working its way through him at the pace these things actually move, rather than the pace we prefer.
I have been the one talking for this family for so long that I genuinely stopped noticing I was doing it. And sitting here tonight, I think Dad saw that. And I think part of why he did this was to make sure at least one thing in this family couldn't be talked over.
It was the most self-aware thing my brother had ever said in my presence. I didn't rush to fill the space it left. I let it exist in the room, undecorated and unmanaged, the way honest things deserve to exist.
He wasn't trying to punish you, Daniel. I've been thinking about it all day, and I genuinely believe he was trying to say something he never found the right words for, and he ran out of time to keep looking.
My brother nodded slowly, holding that interpretation up against the one he'd been carrying since the afternoon. Then, without ceremony, he slid the watch across the table to me.
It was always supposed to be yours. I can see that now. And I'm sorry it took a lawyer's office and 30 years of not listening well enough to get me there.
I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, not physically, though it had real weight, but in the way of objects that have been worn long enough to absorb the life of the person who wore them. I turned it over in my hands, felt the smoothness of the gold case where decades of being touched had worn away the finish, opened it and read the engraving again even though I already knew every word. Then I fastened it onto my wrist. It was made for a larger wrist than mine, my grandfather's wrist, my father's wrist, and it sat slightly loose, not quite fitted. But I wasn't going to take it off. I was going to get it sized, and I was going to wear it every day for the rest of my life. Let me pause here because I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a family where one person simply assumed the authority to speak for everyone else, to make decisions and announce them, to take things without asking because they had always taken things without asking? Have you ever been the quieter person in a room full of people who should have been quieter themselves? Drop that in the comments. I read every single one. And knowing that this experience is not mine alone is something that helps me more than I can explain. And if the story is landing somewhere real for you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I want to keep sharing stories like this with people who need to hear them. The weeks that followed the estate reading were some of the strangest of my life, and also in some ways the most clarifying. The dramatic moment had passed, the watch had been given, the engraving had been read, the truth had been laid on the table in that conference room. But the actual work of change, the slow and unglamorous labor of a relationship trying to become something different after decades of being something else, was only just beginning. Daniel called me the following Sunday. This was our usual family call day, but he called me directly before calling our mother, which had never happened before in our adult lives. I noticed it the way you notice small departures from long-established patterns quietly, with more weight than the thing itself might seem to deserve. He asked about my week in a way that actually waited for the answer. He asked how I was sleeping, whether the grief was coming in waves or sitting more consistently, whether I had been eating real meals or defaulting to whatever was easiest. These were questions I had never heard from him before, questions that required him to be interested in information he couldn't use to build a plan. When I asked what he thought we should do about the gutters at our mother's house before winter, he said he'd looked at a few options and then asked me what I thought made more sense given what I knew about her schedule. He asked, not told, not informed. Asked. It was such a small thing. It was enormous. I wore the watch to work that Monday morning. My colleagues noticed it almost immediately. A vintage omega on a woman's wrist is not a subtle piece, and the people I worked with knew me well enough to know it was not something I had owned before. When they asked about it, I told them the short version. My father had given it to me, and it meant more than I could easily explain. Saying that out loud, to people who had no stake in the story and no history with the family, felt like a kind of claiming. Not dramatic, not performative, just honest and direct. I had something that was mine. I was wearing it in the world. I was putting language to what my father had put into an engraving because he couldn't find the words in time. One of my colleagues, a woman who had lost her own father 2 years earlier, looked at the watch on my wrist one afternoon with an expression that I recognized as the specific tenderness of someone who has navigated the same particular terrain.
The things our parents leave us are never really about the objects. They're about what the objects were standing in for, all those years when the real thing couldn't be said out loud.
She said it gently, as an observation rather than an instruction, and I felt the truth of it move, feeling like something settling into place after a long time of being unsettled. I thought about that for days afterward, about my father, careful and loving and often too quiet at the wrong moments, trying in his final months to say the things that had been living in him without sufficient language for years, about the Tuesday phone call and the Thursday afternoons and the French braids he practiced until his hands learned the pattern. All of it had been the vocabulary he had. The engraving was just the sentence he had finally been brave enough to complete. 3 months after the estate reading, Daniel called and asked if we could have lunch together. Just the two of us, without our mother as the connecting point, without a family agenda or a decision to be made. We hadn't done that since our late 20s. We met at a diner halfway between our houses, the kind of place with laminated menus and reliable coffee and no atmosphere to speak of, which suited us perfectly because we didn't need atmosphere. We needed honesty, and honesty is easier in plain rooms with practical chairs. We talked for 2.5 hours. Not about the watch, not about the estate. Those things had been laid to rest as completely as they could be. We talked about our father. We compared memories we had never compared before, discovered that we had known different versions of the same man, that the father I had spent Thursdays with in those quiet afternoons was not quite the same father Daniel had been managing the care plan with in his efficiency and worry. I told Daniel about the Tuesday phone call, the one where Dad had said he saw me. Daniel was quiet for a long moment after I told him, and then he said something that connected two things I hadn't realized were connected.
He called me that same week, actually. He said he hoped I would learn to listen before it was too late to practice. And I thought he meant in my work, in my professional life, and I filed it away and moved on. I understand now that he didn't mean my work at all.
The recognition in his voice was real and a little painful. I thought about my father making those two calls in the same week, carefully and separately, trying to give both his children something they needed to hear from him before he ran out of time to say it.
He was doing the same thing with both of us. He was trying to give me the feeling of being seen and trying to give you the chance to learn to see differently, while he still had the time to do it.
Daniel nodded slowly, looking out the window at the gray November parking lot. I watched him carry the weight of that, and I found that I didn't feel anger at him sitting across from me in that moment. I felt something closer to compassion for the version of him that had been made too large too early, for the pattern that had calcified before he was old enough to question it, for the man who was only now beginning to understand what it had cost both of us. We left the diner and stood in the parking lot for a moment in the cold. Before we got into our separate cars, Daniel pulled me into a hug that was longer and less comfortable than the obligatory hugs we usually exchanged at family events, which made it more real than all of those combined. We weren't rebuilt. We weren't suddenly the close siblings we had never been, but we were being honest with each other for perhaps the first time in our shared lives, and honest is a better place to build from than most of the alternatives. Six High Mother came to visit me 2 months ago. She brought a cardboard box. She'd been slowly working through my father's remaining personal items, the smaller things that didn't make it into the estate document, but that she wanted to distribute thoughtfully rather than send to donation in a single clearing-out. We spent a Sunday afternoon going through it together at my kitchen table. Old cufflinks, a tie pin from the 60s, reading glasses still in their case, 3 history books with his handwritten notes in the margins, penciled observations about events that had happened centuries before his life that he had thought about deeply and personally, At the bottom of the box, wrapped in one of his handkerchiefs, was a folded piece of paper in my father's handwriting. Yellow notepad paper, the kind he'd kept in the kitchen drawer his entire life, used for grocery lists and phone messages and the occasional thought he wanted to hold on to. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It wasn't dated. It was just a few sentences in his handwriting, written at some point in the private interior of his life, not intended to be found, or perhaps intended to be found exactly like this after he was gone. It said the bravest thing I never did was say out loud the things I wrote down in the dark. I hope the people I love know anyway. My mother read it over my shoulder and made a small sound that existed in the exact space between crying and laughing. The sound of someone encountering a truth they already knew but had never seen written down.
He kept journals for 40 years. Small notebooks, private ones that he never showed me. I found them in the back of his closet when I was cleaning out his things, and I read just enough to understand that there was a whole interior life in him that he never quite found the way to speak.
She said it without reproach, with the full and complicated love of a woman who had shared a life with a particular person for 40 years and understood him better than anyone, including his silences.
But at the end, in those last months, he started to close the distance. The phone calls, the engraving, the things he said to both of you, those weren't small things for him. Those were the hardest things he had ever done.
I held the note in my hands for a long time. My father's handwriting, which I had been looking at my whole life on grocery lists and birthday cards and the notes he left on the kitchen counter, now felt like a language I was only beginning to fully understand. I put it with the watch. They belonged together, the statement and the admission, the thing he finally said and the acknowledgement that he wished he had been brave enough to say more things sooner. They sit together now on my dresser at night, and in the morning when I put the watch on, they are the first things I see. The watch is on my wrist as I tell you this story. It has been sized now, fitted properly to my wrist. No longer my grandfather's watch or my father's watch in the sense of something made for someone else's dimensions. It is mine. It sits exactly where it belongs, and it is since the day I had it fitted, and I have not taken it off since. I look at it throughout the day the way you look at something that is doing several things at once, telling time and holding memory, and keeping a promise and continuing a conversation that began in a small jeweler shop 8 months before my father died, when a man with limited time decided to use. Some of it saying the thing he had been carrying since Easter dinner in 1996. It reminds me that my father saw me, even when his seeing was quiet and imperfect, and occasionally obscured by the louder presences in the room. It reminds me that love does not always arrive on schedule, that it can arrive late and still be real, that being seen after years of not being seen is both a gift and a particular kind of grief simultaneously. It reminds me of Daniel's face in the lawyer's office, the ground dropping away, the unraveling of something that had been tightly held for too long, and of two people eating diner food in a gray November parking lot and calling it a beginning. It reminds me that people can change if the right thing breaks through clearly enough, if someone they love makes the truth permanent and hands it to them with their own hands. It reminds me of a 7-year-old girl being told the watch was for the men in the family, and of a man who heard that and spent the next 27 years quietly deciding it wasn't true, and of the specific courage it required to finally, in the last months of his life, do something about it. My father was not a perfect man. No one is. He was a good man who was sometimes too quiet at the moments that required loudness, who let too many true things go unsaid for too many years because the saying of them felt risky in ways he couldn't always overcome. But in the end, with what time he had, he said the truest thing. He made it permanent and irrefutable. He put it somewhere that required another person to place it directly in my hands. 8 words. Everything he had been trying to say for 34 years, distilled down to 8 words in small, precise letters inside a watch case, in a place you could only read if you looked closely enough. For Nora. She always had time for what mattered most. I am still learning to fully become the person those words describe. I am still learning to claim that description without feeling like I need to qualify it or make it smaller or check whether someone else in the room has a problem with it. But I have the reminder on my wrist every day, and I am not taking it off. Street, if you have stayed with me through this whole story, I want to say something to you directly because I believe some of you watching this are here for a reason beyond the story itself. If you are the quieter person in your family, the one who shows up without announcing it, who does the work without building a presentation around it, who holds things together in ways that don't make any noise, I want you to know something important. Being seen is not the same thing as being celebrated loudly. Sometimes being seen is a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday. Sometimes it is 8 words inside a watch case that someone has to hand you with their own hands. Sometimes it is a sibling sitting across from you in a diner 3 months too late. Finally learning to listen. Those quiet forms of recognition are not lesser versions of being loved. They are sometimes the most genuine kind, because they come from a place deep enough that someone had to work to reach them. They are not the easy love, the default love, the love that comes because it's expected. They are the chosen love, the deliberate love, the love that required something of the person who felt it. Your person may not always say the true thing directly or on time, but watch for where they place their attention when they think no one is keeping score. Watch for the Tuesday calls and the Thursday afternoons and the small deliberate choices that don't come with announcements. That is almost always where the love actually lives. And the places that require you to look closely enough to find it. I wear my father's watch every day, not because of how it came to me, though the way it came to me matters. I wear it because every time I look at it, I hear my father's voice saying the truest thing he ever found the courage to say. She always had time for what mattered most. I am still learning to be that person fully and without apology. But I have the reminder on my wrist, and I am wearing it in the world, and that is a beginning. Thank you for being here through this entire story. If it meant something to you, please like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me about the quiet ways someone in your life has made you feel seen when you needed it most. I read every single one, and they stay with me longer than you might expect. Until next time, the truest things are often the quietest. Make sure you are listening closely enough to hear them.